Hello, ladies. Harmeet Dhillon here, your Republican National Committee woman from California, and also active in the Trump campaign as National Co-Chair of Women for Trump, Lawyers for Trump, as well as Indian Voices for Trump. It's a tremendous honor to serve in those roles as a volunteer conservative in our great state and throughout the country. And I'm also honored to be a member of the California Republican Women's Federated, an amazing group that has had so much to do with keeping some parts of our state sane. And I try to do my part in that as well. And so when your leadership asked me to say a few words for your meeting, which I cannot attend in person, I think we're all doing it virtually, I was very honored to be asked. And so what I wanted to talk about today is some of the legal work that I've been doing in California to help us be more free as citizens. And setting aside politics, I think we can all agree that this COVID challenge has been very difficult for almost every family in California. It's posed significant employment risks for people, health risks for people. I personally know some folks who've lost their lives, and that's been very tragic for those families, not to mention tremendous stress. In these times of stress and difficulty, however, we typically rely on certain goalposts or benchmarks or places of comfort in our lives that can help us with stability and normalcy. And under COVID, a lot of those have been taken away from us as well. And so as a lawyer and as a civil rights lawyer who frequently gets called upon to handle various issues having to do with our civil rights as citizens, I began to get phone calls soon after the shutdowns began. There was that 2 weeks to flatten the curve period that I think we were all happy to do our part as citizens, and then we began seeing that these limitations were going to go on and on. And so when the COVID shutdown started, my law firm began to get a number of requests to help with civil rights litigation concerning our right to worship in church. And we also began getting requests concerning protest, and then businesses that were shut down, and eventually schools as well, and some other issues along the way. So together with Mark Moiser at my firm, as well as different colleagues, sometimes different law firms around the state and around the country, as well as people in my own law firm, we began to file lawsuits, mainly in federal court, concerning our First Amendment rights, our rights to equal protection and due process. There were a couple of other cases as well that I'll talk about, but we initially started with the case called Gish versus Newsome on behalf of some pastors and parishioners in Southern California during that early time period. You may recall when you could even get arrested just for driving your car into a church parking lot and sitting there and listening to your pastor or your priest give a sermon remotely while you're sitting inside your car. So we filed that lawsuit against San Bernardino and Riverside counties, as well as the governor and health officials. And as a result of that lawsuit, the governor's office and the attorney general's office immediately announced that they did not interpret their rules to be providing for the arrest of people in their vehicles, and that would not be a criminal violation, although people had been getting arrested for that. So right away, our lawsuits had an impact of allowing people to be able to worship outdoors at least. Over the time, we filed 2 more lawsuits or joined 2 more lawsuits over religion. One of those has since been dismissed, and because some of the rules changed in that county, and the other one went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. That case is called South Bay United Pentecostal, and that case, similar to the ones that we filed, also concerned the right to worship freely in church without limitations that do not apply to people who are going shopping in a Costco or a grocery store. And so both of those 2 cases that remain are still pending in the courts. We are co-counseling with another conservative firm in Southern California on one, but the other case, Gish, is scheduled for argument in the Ninth Circuit in the middle of November. Another important case that we handled in regard to the First Amendment is a case called Gibbons versus Musa. In that case, we represented Ron Gibbons and Christine Bish, who both sought permits to protest in Sacramento. One, Christine concerning the COVID shutdowns in general, and Ron concerning the state's slow walking of background checks for gun owners and gun store employees. Similarly, in that case, we filed the case in federal court up in Sacramento this time, and similarly, we were not able to succeed right away in that case. However, the governor soon changed his guidelines, we believe in part in response to our lawsuit because it was difficult to defend the total shutdown, by requiring that some of those restrictions be removed, and so at least outdoor protests would be permitted if they're socially distanced and with masks, which I think is a reasonable compromise. I know everybody doesn't agree with that, but what is interesting is that it is only in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests that the governor changed those rules. We still believe that our clients' constitutional rights were violated at that time, and indeed many other citizens have not been allowed to protest freely the way they would like concerning the government shutdown, and so that case is also on appeal in the Ninth Circuit, and it's also going to be argued the same day as that religion case. Some of the other lawsuits that we filed were on behalf of a number of different types of businesses. We represented restaurants, even a dog grooming service, a gondola tourism service down in Orange County. We represented patio furniture store, which was not allowed to sell patio furniture, even though Costco and Home Depot and other big box stores were allowed to sell the exact same furniture. So that's what we call an equal protection and a due process violation. We have also represented hotels and other types of businesses as well. And what's been really challenging so far is, although the courts have not agreed with us to change the rules at this stage, we are much more hopeful of our chances on appeal in some of these cases. The governor typically responded to many of our lawsuits by changing the rules himself. And another great example of that is the closure of the Orange County beaches a few months ago. You may recall that we believe in retaliation to Orange County attempting to open up its businesses and operate safely during COVID, and sort of out of step with the governor's timetable, the governor shut down the beaches of Orange County. We immediately the following day filed a federal lawsuit and as well as a state lawsuit on behalf of two different groups of plaintiffs over the next couple of days. By the time we could have a hearing on our motions for temporary restraining orders, the governor had already negotiated an opening of those beaches with the counties, and I believe that had it not been for those lawsuits, the beaches of Orange County would still be closed today, which would be very unfortunate for business as well as for the mental health and physical health of people in Orange County who are being discriminated against, because in adjoining counties where the county leaders had allowed the beaches to be open, there was no such shutdown by the governor. So it seemed to be pretty punitive and retaliatory by him, which is really unfortunate use of his power as a leader. I believe the case we have pending right now with the very large impact of millions of families in California is a case called Brock versus Newsome. And in Brock versus Newsome, we're challenging the governor's virtual shutdown for education for over 80% of the students in California. He abruptly, with really no fanfare or much warning, announced at the end of July that he would be shutting down the schools and not allowing in-person education. And this was obviously devastating to California families. People have been struggling already in the spring semester with their children's lack of education and some of the mental and physical health issues that accompany depriving children of needed company and companionship. And what's most galling about the school case is that the science doesn't support there being an implication of any risk for students, really. There is a slight indicator of risk for older teachers who might catch it from one another, but not even for most of the teachers in the target age groups that most of them belong to. And so shutting down the schools really was, and we still believe is, a purely political act designed to show the state's control and really give in to the California Teachers Union, which is demanding, in addition to so-called safety measures, also single-payer health care, defunding the police, and a number of other terrible ideas that I think most would agree are a bad idea for our country, much less our state. And so that case is still going on. We had initially been scheduled for a temporary restraining order. The judge changed that. It then became a preliminary injunction hearing. The judge changed that as well, and the judge most recently announced that he was going to grant summary judgment against us if we did not demonstrate to him why he should not defer, basically, to the governor's opinion on these health issues. And so that has been fully briefed, and we're waiting for a ruling from the court. And if the ruling is unfavorable, we fully expect to be appealing that decision, because I think there's really very little that's more important in our society than properly educating children. I think this whole COVID situation, if I would conclude here, really brings home a few things for me as a California conservative. First is, I don't think we spend enough time and attention on electing local elected officials. I think that we could do a lot better on that, because a lot of the people who are imposing tyranny on all of you are people who are local electeds. And sometimes we only get excited about presidential races or statewide races or even races for Congress. We don't get enough involved in Board of Supervisors and mayors and people like that. These are the people who influence who your local county health official is. And the governor has really used a decentralized process to pin the blame for shutdowns on other people besides himself, when it's ultimately his leadership that has put all of our businesses out of business, or many of us, has made it more difficult for us to maintain our mental health and physical health, and has really deprived every single California citizen of their civil rights, their freedom of movement, freedom of worship, freedom to protest, and so forth. And so I think we could do a better job making sure that we, at least at the local level, elect better leaders who are more accountable to us, who will not use their power in arbitrary and tyrannical fashion, as has been done to so many of us today. I think it's also important for us to really hold those local leaders accountable. It's important for us to take ownership of the education of our children. I think that perhaps those of us who may not have children in schools today may be less concerned about this issue, but now we are seeing the impact of how children who aren't being educated, they have an impact on employers. For example, if your employees are at home taking care of the children or educating them, which is something your tax dollars are paying for the state to do, they're not able to come to work and do jobs, which affects productivity. So I think we could all do a better job stepping up and knowing that all of these things are interconnected, and we can't just sort of look to electing a president or a governor and let everything else take care of itself. It really doesn't. We have to be more responsible for what happens locally. Excuse me. So in conclusion, thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to share with you my journey, which is not over, on COVID litigation. I suspect it's going to be going on into next year. Even if COVID were to stop tomorrow, we would still be going to court for our appeals, and otherwise trying to make sure that this never happens again to Californians and to Americans. We also filed lawsuits in Hawaii, in New Jersey, and in Virginia, and we've done some work in some other states as well, pre-litigation. With a few exceptions, the judges have not been receptive. That has not deterred me, Mark Moiser, and our friends and colleagues and supporters and donors, many of whom are amongst the audience here, from pursuing these goals, because they are so important. And it is so important to fight back, regardless of the outcome. That's part of life. That's part of, I think, being a citizen, is not accepting something even though you may seem powerless if it is wrong. So that's really been a defining characteristic of my law career. It's an honor that many of you have supported me, and I very much hope to be able to continue fighting for the civil rights of Californians for the rest of my career. And so it's such an honor that you allowed me to share this with you. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great conference.